In the dying gold of a Wyoming sunset, the old Dalton Ranch stretched like a kingdom cut from dust and legend, its white fences glowing against the hills, its cattle grazing lazily as if they had never known the taste of danger. But that calm picture was a lie Maria Dalton had grown up with. For danger lived inside the house, not in the form of drunken cowhands or bandits, but in her own father, Sheriff Augustus Dalton, a man carved from stone and iron, a man who loved his laws more than his daughter's freedom, a man whose shadow stretched further than his authority, reaching deep into Maria's dreams and decisions. So when she fled on the back of a paint horse that autumn evening, lavender dress fluttering like a whisper of rebellion, she knew she was doing something her father would never forgive, something that could break the little fragile peace she had left in the world. And that something had a name: Cole Hawthorne, the richest cowboy in 3 counties, a man whispered about in saloons and admired for his quiet strength, a man with a past sealed behind steel blue eyes, a man who never bowed to anyone, not even Sheriff Dalton, yet somehow softened whenever Maria was near. She reached his ranch just as the wind carried the first bite of winter, her heart racing, her breath catching as she saw him standing on the porch like he had been waiting all his life for her to arrive. And when he stepped toward her, dust rising around his boots, she felt her fears melt away until only the truth remained, a truth she had spent months avoiding. She loved him, and he loved her. Yet love in the West was rarely safe, never simple and often dangerous, especially when the girl belonged to a lawman who had publicly declared that no Hawthorne would ever come near his family. Maria slid down from her horse, boots landing softly, and for a moment neither spoke. They simply stared at each other like two souls recognizing home, until finally she whispered the words that trembled like brittle glass. "Don't tell my father." And Cole, rugged and steady, closed the distance between them, his voice low, yet carrying a promise that felt older than the mountains. "Maria, I'd rather lose my land, my name, even my life, than ever betray your trust." And though that vow comforted her, she knew it would cost him dearly. She followed him inside the warm ranch house where fire cracked in the hearth, casting long shadows that danced like spirits across the walls. And as she sat with him, finally safe, she told him everything she had kept buried, the arranged marriage her father had forced upon her with a cruel cattle, barren twice her age, the threats, the pressure, the desperation that pushed her to escape. And as Cole listened, his jaw clenched with a fury he rarely displayed, for he was a man slow to anger but unstoppable when it came. When she finished trembling, he placed his hat on the table with a thud that echoed like a war drum, telling her firmly, "You're staying here tonight, and tomorrow we'll face this together." But even then, Maria shook her head, fear clouding her eyes, for she knew what her father would do if he found her in Cole's home. Cole would become a target, the Hawthorne Ranch would become a battlefield, and maybe blood would spill, hers or his or both. The night deepened around them while Cole sent his best hand, Silas, to keep watch on the road for anyone approaching, and the two of them sat in the quiet crackle of the fire, Maria slowly allowing herself to breathe, to hope, to trust that maybe her life could still be her own. Outside, the prairie wind howled like a warning. Yet inside Cole's home she felt something she had never felt within the walls of her father's house: freedom, fragile but real. Hours passed, and while she dozed on the sofa, Cole watched over her like a guardian forged from loyalty and silent devotion, unaware that at that very moment, several miles away in the sheriff's office, Augustus Dalton slammed his fist on the table when he learned his daughter was missing, his fury boiling over as he growled that there was only one man bold enough, or stupid enough, to hide her, Cole Hawthorne. And with that fire burning in his chest, he saddled his stallion and rode into the night with deputies following behind like a storm, unaware that his next steps would tear open secrets that had been buried for decades. Secrets involving his own past with Cole's family. Secrets that would force the West to choose sides between law and love. But for now, Mariah slept peacefully for the first time in months, dreaming of a life where she could choose her own destiny. While outside, Cole stood on the porch staring at the stars, knowing in his bones that by morning, war would come to his ranch, and he would face it willingly, because once he made a promise, especially to her, he would rather die than break it. The fire dimmed, the night deepened, and somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled like a warning from the heavens, signaling that the story of Mariah and Cole was only beginning, a story that would shake the entire Wyoming frontier, test loyalties, ignite rivalries, and carve their names into the legends of the Wild West forever. Dawn bled slowly across the horizon as the world awakened in hues of pink and copper, the kind of morning that usually brought peace to the ranches of Wyoming. But peace had no place on the Hawthorne Ranch today, for Cole had barely closed his eyes before one of his ranch hands burst into the house breathless and pale, warning that dust clouds were rising on the North Ridge. Too many horses to be a simple patrol, and without a word, Cole's instincts screamed that Sheriff Dalton was coming, not to talk, not to reason, but to reclaim his daughter by force if needed. Mariah sat up abruptly when she heard the commotion, her face shadowed with dread, whispering Cole's name like a prayer and a plea. But he stepped toward her with the calm of a man who had already made peace with whatever fate demanded, gently pressing his hand over hers and saying, "No matter what happens, I won't hand you over to a future you never chose." And though fear tightened her chest, a strange courage sparked inside her too, because she finally understood what it meant to be loved by a man with a lion's heart. Outside, cowboys mounted horses, rifles ready, though Cole ordered them to shoot only if fired upon, for he refused to let this turn into needless bloodshed. Yet he knew the sheriff was not a man who respected restraint, not when his pride had been wounded, not when he believed his daughter had been stolen. Mariah stood behind Cole as he walked out to meet the riders approaching, in a thunderous wave of hooves and dust. Sheriff Dalton at the front like a storm made of flesh and fury, eyes blazing beneath the brim of his hat, and he reined in his horse so abruptly that sparks flew as its hooves skidded across the dirt. Deputies fanning out behind him like the jaws of a trap. "Step aside, Hawthorne," the sheriff barked, voice echoing across the silent land. "Mariah comes home with me now." But Cole didn't budge. Shoulders squared, tone steady as he replied, "She's safe here, and she stays here unless she wants otherwise." And that single word once lit a match inside the sheriff, who spat angrily, accusing Cole of poisoning his daughter's mind, accusing him of being just like his father. A name that made Cole stiffen because it hit a wound Dalton knew all too well. Before the fight could erupt, Mariah stepped forward, voice shaking yet strong as she said, "Father, I'm not property to be taken. I came here on my own." But Augustus' face twisted with betrayal and rage, calling her confused, calling Cole a manipulator, calling love something she wasn't old enough to understand. And as the tension grew so thick it strangled the air, one of the deputies panicked, firing a warning shot that spooked the horses and scattered the standoff into chaos. Cole shielded Mariah instantly, pulling her behind him as ranch hands scrambled, dust swirling like a tornado, and in the madness, Sheriff Dalton drew his gun on Cole, shouting that he'd end this once and for all. But before he could fire, Mariah ran between them, crying out for him to stop, her bravery shocking everyone, especially her father, whose fury cracked just enough for truth to seep in. She told him everything, how the arranged marriage was breaking her spirit, how she had tried to be the obedient daughter he wanted, how Cole had offered protection, not pressure, how running away was the only choice she had left. And for the first time, Augustus Dalton's face showed something other than anger, regret, raw and unexpected. Silence settled as the sheriff lowered his gun, wrestling with the realization that he had become the very tyrant he'd spent his life fighting against. And though pride clawed at him, he finally met Cole's gaze and muttered that he had wronged them. Both that perhaps love was not a crime worth punishing. The deputies lowered their weapons. The ranch hands eased their grips, and the storm that had threatened to break the west slowly dissolved into a fragile truce. Later that afternoon, father and daughter spoke alone inside the hawthorn barn, the smell of hay and leather filling the air as Mariah wept, not because she was afraid, but because she had finally been heard. And in a voice heavy with guilt, her father promised to end the arranged marriage, to let her choose her own path, even if that path led to Cole Hawthorne. Peace returned to the Hawthorne Ranch in soft waves, and as the sun dipped into the mountains, painting the sky like an old Western painting, Cole and Mariah stood together on the porch, hands intertwined, knowing that their love had survived the kind of trials that forged legends, knowing that the West would remember this day, not as a war, but as the moment a father, a daughter, and a cowboy chose courage over control, compassion over pride, and destiny over fear. The prairie wind carried their laughter into the distance. And for all the viewers listening to this story right now, if you want more tales of love, danger, honor, and the untamed Wild West, make sure you subscribe to Cowboy Legends Story, because more heart-pounding adventures are saddling up right around the corner, and you won't want to miss a single one.